ourselves. So we've been waiting here most of the day. But I'm going to tell you this, it's worth it because tonight here, the Smashing Damn Pumpkins!
Welcome to episode 28 of the Hipsters United podcast. My name is Chris, and joining me this week are Jason.
Hello.
Jill.
I'm young.
And Andrew.
Hi there.
After a couple weeks of instant tour reactions, we're back to our normal podcast schedule and format this week. Of course, most of the news this week yet again revolves around the 20th anniversary tour. And last week I talked to Jill and got her impressions of seeing the Black Sunshine and White Crosses shows in New York. But this past week, Jason, you saw both sets in Washington, D.C., and Jill was of the opinion that the Black Sunshine set was a better show, but seeing as how this was their third attempt at White Crosses, and you'd seen what was essentially the Black Sunshine set a number of times previously, do you agree with her assessment?
Do you really think Black Sunshine is better, Jill?
My opinion has changed due to at least the last show that I saw. But of the two New York shows, I thought that the Black Sunshine show was better performed here, at least.
I gotta say though, here's the thing. My opinion is crap because I sat in the second row for White Crosses, so forget it. I mean, that was the better show because I was sitting in the second row. I don't think anything else had a chance. I honestly deeply think that people's opinions of shows are really largely determined by where they sit, and so, that show was incredibly a blast. I don't know that makes it better in any objective sense.
It's way easier to get the jokes when you're sitting up close. Or not the jokes, but to get the gist of what's going on.
It's way easier to see how much fun everyone in the band is having.
Yes.
The impression that probably everyone has about this tour is that it's some kind of like stress fest and that Billy Corgan would be tearing his hair out if he had hair, but he's not. I mean, they're all really relaxed and having a good time.
What was it that Boston reviewer wrote about it being a place to go to bask in bitterness and confusion?
That's why I go to the shows.
I'm just wondering if
I'm looking for.
If Metro Mix picked that up and they were like, awesome, are you looking for bitterness and confusion? Check out the Smashing Pumpkins concert tonight at the Wang Theater.
Have you always wanted to go to a bleak purgatory? Tonight, it's the Smashing Damn Pumpkins.
but you're right, Jason. The closer you are, the more you realize what fun they're having on stage, and it's not just like the singles or whatever. It's the experience. I'll never forget one of the nights that I went to see the Pumpkins last year in Atlanta, and I could see during United States when Billy was, doing his crazy soloing a la Hendrix, I could see Jeff and Lisa in the wings, and they were just laughing their asses off.
Yeah.
He is just totally deadpan, totally serious, whatever, and they are just laughing so hard. You can see it you can't see it anywhere else, but.
Yeah. I mean, I looked around at that show, and it didn't matter what part of the show it was. The people in the first 4 or 5 rows were having a great time.
Right.
I mean, they were playing, Little Red Riding Hood, and, some guy 3 or 4 rows back had this huge smile on his face, and was like, he doesn't know what that song is,
Right. He might be
I doubt anyone in the back 5 rows had a huge smile on their face. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wonder if that's why your opinion of the show is better when you're in the front, just because you're surrounded by the fans that kind of know what to expect and are there to have a good time, and not kind of the people who trickle in later who are there for just to see a show and are the ones that Billy keeps talking about that are disappointed by not hearing the hits.
That's not what I think. I think it has to do with just you're more stimulated. I mean, there's actually something to look at. I mean, when you're in the back, the band are just dots. I mean, you're really just listening largely, When you're up front, there's a million things to see and do, and more stimulated people are probably more happy people,
Yeah.
That's just my guess.
And I think it also feels like you're more a part of the concert, like you're included more. That's a strange thing to say, but since I spend the first few songs of each show taking photos, since I have been recently, I've talked to a lot of people that are, crammed up against the barrier or whatever, and it's been across the board, like, I've never seen the pumpkins before, or I have seen the pumpkins before, and how did you get this job to take photos? But I can't put everyone into different categories, but everyone just has this energy of excitement, because you feed off of that energy that the band has, I think, when you're that close. And you feel intimidated when Billy stares you down with his weird, crazy headdress costume thing on. It's like you feel the intimidation and the excitement and the sense of experimentation and the camaraderie between the band members. So I totally agree with Jason.
And you get to see Jeff make his one guitar move. Like, Billy has all these moves. Jeff has one move. It kind of involves like his fretboard hand like sliding up with like one finger and his other hand just kind of going into the air at the same time.
Except for when he kind of
turns to the side and looks away too. That's like his only move. He's got to build up a repertoire.
He's in training, yeah.
It's like, show him what you got, kid.
Billy still has to teach him how to play with his teeth.
Actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, Jason, because last night at Mohegan Sun, there was this moment, and it's gonna be hard for me to remember what solo, but it must have been like, was it Super Christ or United States, something, but Billy like looked over at Jeff like as if to dare him to do something, and I could see this 20 rows back. I wasn't super close to the stage, but I could tell what was going on, and like they were laughing quite a bit throughout the set last night, and I could see Jeff like perceptibly shake his head, and Billy like smiled at him, and he was like, "Come on!" You could just tell that's what was going through his head, and so Jeff just busted out like a Billy-esque move. It was pretty hilarious, and Billy just like turned around to Jimmy, and you could see Jimmy's face light up, and they were all just laughing. I don't know if it was something that was going on behind the scenes, but it was really funny.
It's like he's a kid.
Kind of. Kind of.
So like Jimmy's the uncle, right? And so Billy and Jimmy are like brothers, and they're like teasing the little guy.
Teasing the newbie,
Well, Jill, tell us about the show at the Mohegan Sun last night. How was the mix? How was the experience compared to the big 2-night event?
I had a really fun time last night. Initially, I hadn't expected to go because I realized kind of last minute that there's not a lot of public transportation up there and yada, yada, yada. But Zach and I rented a car and we went up there because I was just like, no, we're going to see the show. The mix was great. They played, I wrote about it on hipstersunited.com, and I thought it was really singles heavy, but we got more. This show actually started at 7:30 instead of 8 o'clock, which has been sort of the standard time for the other shows, I believe. So we got there right as the set was starting because it kind of took me by surprise. They were starting that early. And the show was really singles heavy, but they still went into a lot of jams. They opened with I Am One, Part 2, which I had been joking with Zach earlier yesterday. I was like, is tonight an I Am One kind of night, or is it a, set the controls for the Heart of the Sun kind of night? Because I didn't know what they were going to be closing the set with, since these sort of one-off shows have been a little unpredictable. And so they opened with I Am One Part 2, which was a really cool opener. Exactly. Thanks. They opened with a ton of feedback. The Mohegan Sun Arena, or it's actually a true arena, so it's quite large. It was really different than what I've seen the Pumpkins play since their reformation. But the audience was pretty into it. They were really respectful. Billy was starting to make some like jerky comments during like Heavy Metal Machine and prior to that. But no one reacted. They thought it was funny. Like I could hear people laughing in the audience. Like I said, I was 20 or 30 rows back from the stage. But from where I sat, people were really into it. I think that Jason and I found a couple of reviews earlier of people that were, up in the nosebleed section, so to speak, that really didn't have a great time, but that kind of goes
Hated
back to, yeah, exactly. It goes back to that, what we were talking about earlier, that they were kind of frustrated by it. But I thought they performed smashingly.
Oh gosh,
Yeah,
Oh
sorry.
boy.
Chris, Chris,
It was really great.
You know, I agree with you about the dangers of consuming a set list, a list of songs they played, like reading it and thinking you know something about how the show was.
Yep.
I gotta say though, I've attributed in my head a lot of the problems with the Black Sunshine shows and how the crowd has become angry to the fact that they were ending the main set with Heavy Metal Machine performed in a new arrangement, basically, that people would not be familiar with. Then Set the Controls for Heart of the Sun. I know Glass's theme is in there, but that hardly even counts. It hardly even happens. It's so short.
Yeah.
So Heavy Metal Machine, Set the Controls for Heart of the Sun, and then they leave, and then they come back to this encore, and the encore is basically a joke. They play these kazoos, like it's not a real song. And so, I think it pisses people off that when the encore, and Billy actually was going on these kind of rants against the fans too. Not all of them, but just kind of he was letting some of these frustrations about I don't know, whatever. He's letting out these frustrations at some of the audience as part of his quote unquote song. Everything is beautiful during the encore. But I think that part of the reason people are mad is that they're thinking, I just sat through 35 minutes of noise, and you come up for the encore, and you don't give me a real song. I think they, a lot of people felt that there was going to be some kind of reward, and then there wasn't one. And I think that's a pretty fair expectation. I'm not trying to crack on that at all. But what fascinated me about last night's set list was that the way the show ended was Gossamer,
Yep.
Sounds of Silence / Little Red Riding Hood, Heavy Metal Machine, Set the Controls for Heart of the Sun.
Yeah.
That's the last 4 songs. Every one of those is probably 10 minutes minimum. Well, maybe Sounds of
Gossamer
Silence.
was even longer last night.
Maybe Sounds of Silence is 8 minutes.
40
Gossamer
minutes.
is 15 minutes at least. Heavy Metal Machine is 12 minutes probably. And then Set the Controls is 20 minutes. So literally
Yeah.
the last 45, 50 minutes of that show is just long songs that no one knows, accepting Glass theme. And I wanted to ask Jill, was that an extreme? I mean, you didn't seem to think that. I mean, you said people were leaving during the Pink Floyd song, but
Well,
other than
I think
that,
it's hard to tell, in general. I mean, it's always hard to tell in general what the concert or the crowd's perception of the show is, because it largely depends on where you're seated and the reaction right around you.
sure.
Plus, this is further complicated by the fact that this show started at 7:30, and they started playing Heavy Metal Machine just a few minutes before 10.
Yeah.
So it had been 2.5 hours before they even went into that. Nevertheless, come. Looking at the set list is an entirely different monster than actually experiencing it, like you guys have talked about a lot before. It did not feel at all like they were, those crazy songs back to back to back. I think probably to explain it better, I'd have to move backwards in the set list to their acoustic set, because they ended this acoustic set with a standard, with Landslide into Disarm. And the crowd at that point was on a real high. They were really excited to hear Landslide and Disarm. And then they came out and people realized that they were playing Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness with the weird instrumentation. And then they went into this run of singles. So you had Today, Cherub Rock, Zero, Bodies. And I know Bodies is not a single, but I think that really it was 7 songs in a row that people recognized. So I feel like those more experimental songs were much more well received because people had sort of gone on this emotional high of all of these singles. I saw this guy in front of me just go absolutely wild when he realized they were playing Bodies. He was just over the moon about it. But likewise, that next song, there were these other kind of beefcakey guys, like up, a few rows in front of me and to my right, that had gone crazy for the singles, but when the Gossamer started playing, they were really, really into the jamming, like, because so many of these songs showcase Jimmy. I think, at one point, and I'm trying to remember if it was before Gossamer, because they did the gong stuff a couple of times last night, and Jimmy, like, raises his arms to the crowd and kind of motions for them to give him some love, and people just went crazy for him because he just did a phenomenal job last night. And I think people were a lot more, because they had heard all these singles and they'd heard all these songs that they knew, they were a lot more receptive to these longer, sort of more experimental songs. Plus, one of the things that they kind of mixed it up with, and another thing, the end of Gossamer, people went crazy for that new ending where they, kind of do the incremental chords.
That's the silliest thing.
They did that probably 8 or 9 times. So it was just like, boom. It was crazy. We'll let the recording be the judge of that. It was totally overdone, and the more they like paused and kind of let it sink in, the crazier people went for it. It was really, really funny. The Sounds of Silence, I think people were just kind of like patient for, but Heavy Metal Machine the end of Heavy Metal Machine kind of reverted into a more album version of it. I haven't heard the version that they did last night in a while. Zach even commented on it, but so that ended the set, and I think people realized, good Lord, they've been playing for like almost 3 hours at this point.
So let's come back and set the controls.
So at that point, a lot of people had kind of left. They were leaving. They kind of expected this show was over because it had been going on for so long. And I can't blame people for doing that. It's tiresome. Yeah, exactly. We had to drive home the 2.5 or 3 hours from Uncasville or whatever the heck it's called. But so the weird thing about the encore, and I think I've been vocal in the past about kind of expressing my disdain for Set the Controls. Okay, so Zach and I listened to Pink Floyd almost the entire ride up because it's been sort of my goal to like educate myself better on Pink Floyd, and for some reason I really enjoyed Set the Controls even more last night, and I know I hadn't enjoyed it in the past, but I think we're engaging the audience more. And for some reason, the audience was a lot more responsive to that bird call section of Set the Controls. Like, everyone was laughing around me. Yeah. They realized what the heck was going on. They were like, do I hear birds? This girl behind me, she was like, right. Are they playing with birds?
Yes, real birds.
Yeah, exactly.
When it works.
Train birds.
To the extent that song ever works, that's when you notice it, with the crowd. Yeah. I've seen it be a complete flop, and then I've seen times kind of like what you're saying,
And I think that, like, aisles to go see Billy play timpani, and it was weird because I think they'd finally gotten enough of the people had left that kind of wanted to leave, that the people who were left were more tolerant of this sort of wankery, but
they were more cultish.
Maybe. But there was one point at which, and I haven't seen Billy do this before, maybe you guys have seen him do us on this tour, but he and I think Ginger both held up their bird calls to like their instruments and distorted like the feedback. So they were playing the bird calls into their guitars, and it was making this really weird feedback noise, and people were just like kind of into it. It was sort of rhythmic, and I can't, it's hard for me to explain that. It was really weird. I thought it was cool. So, I don't know. And, they got a really good round of applause at the end of the set. I think there were people that were also unhappy, but I didn't, they weren't around me, so I had a really fantastic time. And it's just, again, I can't impress on people that I talk to the shows about more in terms of the range of musicianship that these guys demonstrate. Like, it's just fascinating to me to see them, to see this classically trained double violinist perform on these ridiculous songs like I Am One Part Two, or the horns doing these fanfares, when they're used to playing ska for No Doubt. And just likewise, all of the acoustics. It's a really unique show, and like we were talking about, I think either last podcast or the podcast before, I think it's taken them a while to kind of hit their stride with it. But last night, I was really feeling it. So
I don't know, in terms of demonstrating the Pumpkins' range, if they can ever get more direct with it than they did in 2000, toward the end of that tour, when they had the harpsichord version of If There Is a God straight into Cash Car Star. That always cracked me up.
It's true. And I think the singles, it was hard for me to kind of accept this because I generally fall into the camp of believing or trusting in the Pumpkins regardless of what they're doing. But the singles heavy set list really did a lot to sort of appease the crowd. The way that it was constructed, even though, people are going to criticize any set list they play, but this particular set list and the construct of it, I think it was really good.
I really think the problem with Black Sunshine is not song selection so much as it's just the ordering at the end. It's just like I was talking about before, just Heavy Metal Machine, Heart of the Sun, and then kazoos. It's just kind of like it's too much. It's too much in a row,
Something else about last night's show is they also played, I believe, both Soma and Mayonnaise. Is that right?
Yeah.
So they played both of those, plus, how many of these songs, you mentioned all the singles in a row, but they also played Tonight Tonight, they played Eye of the Morning, which wasn't a single, but it was a radio promo, wasn't it? I don't think it got much play, but you got Tarantula in there, it was really, the whole middle of the show, almost, besides Super Christ in the United States, and, the beginning of the acoustic set, seemed like it was almost all singles.
And the funny thing is, without Bullet with Butterfly Wings, and without 1979,
right,
which is only about, an extremely rare occurrence. So if we're talking about, they played all the singles, except the two biggest ones, which almost never happens that you have a show without either of them.
Yeah.
You went to a very strange show, Jill.
We went through New Haven, Connecticut on the way home and ate at a place called Mamoun's, which is a sort of famous Middle Eastern place. And this was 2 hours after the set had ended. And I just turned to Zach and I was like, they didn't play Bullet with Butterfly Wings tonight. And he was like, you're totally right. Oh my gosh.
You were like, I have to go to the bathroom. What's wrong?
It was pretty surreal because I would have expected to hear one or the other, but I guess not.
Well, lest we let this section of the podcast get as long as Set the Controls, before we move on, I wanted to quickly talk about kind of the reaction from people besides us, or besides you guys, to this tour.
You mean real America?
Yeah. So, the August tour, Joe Sixpacks and Joe the Plumbers out there who were at the shows. But first of all, I wanted to talk about the press. So the tour in August got, generally pretty good reviews from the mainstream press and music blogs, I thought. And after the release of Glow on the radio, I commented on the podcast, and you guys kind of disagreed that the band had some momentum and that journalists were generally being pretty positive about the band. And I think that from the reviews I've seen out there, this tour kind of has seemed to have lost the band a lot of that momentum in the press. And some of the mainstream media, like the Globe, I think have been fairly even-handed in their reviews, but I thought the overall press that I've seen at least has skewed towards the negative. Jason, you saw dates on both tours, and the set list and style seem pretty similar to me, at least, having only seen one of the shows on this tour. Why do you think the reaction from the press has been so different?
Well, first, let's consider that the August tour largely was in what you might call smaller markets.
Right.
and a lot of the press we're talking about being positive was smaller newspapers in smaller cities. And it doesn't. And I'm not. I don't at all want to say that. I'm not trying to say anything negative about those people. Because I thought those reviews seemed just as smart as the ones that are happening now. But I just wonder if there's more a tendency to go negative when you're in the big city. It's hard to make it in New York, right? And they I think there's a pride there, like of being a New Yorker and a sophisticated, because it's the big guns of the press in New York, and they didn't get there by playing nice all the time. I mean, the New York Post, was pretty scathing.
Yeah.
The New York Times was very positive. Not that anyone cares. And but the two, basically, you have. I agree with you. I think the preponderance of it has been negative. But you also have, at least when you're reading the internet, the news feeds and stuff. I mean, the stories that are getting repeated, and blown up into like the conventional wisdom, have basically been two particularly negative reviews. Although one of them being by the guy from Flux Blog, Matthew Perpetua. I don't know, no idea how to pronounce your last name, Matthew. I'm sorry. His reviews, which weren't entirely negative, but were largely negative. I mean, he had some nice things to say. Reviews usually do. And then the Rolling Stone review was very negative as well. But those two kind of got bundled together, and then the conventional wisdom was like shipped around the world 5 times as the tour is getting horrible, horrible reviews, right? And fans are really mad, based off the couple incidents that are, that got YouTubed with, particular fan being brought up on stage, then another fan that's in New York, and another fan standing in the crowd in Washington, Calvin, whom I photographed, and I actually can largely take credit for that story circulating around the world because I think we were one of a couple outlets to break it, and we're the one that got picked up mostly by some of the bigger sites like Stereo Gum and Rolling Stone. This guy Calvin giving Billy 2 middle fingers from the middle of the crowd during the kazoo encore, right? And Billy calling him out and wanting to know what the deal was. So you couple those incidents and then these couple negative reviews, and you package that up, and the conventional wisdom really quickly became that the tour is a disaster, and that the band is, like Corgan is like, I don't know, really pissed or something, and that he hasn't done himself any favors. I mean, he hasn't. I guess to try to answer the question, Chris, I mean, my feeling as to the difference is that, I don't know, I mean, I guess the difference between this tour and that tour is just that, like, kind of a harsher critics in the big city, and harsher just in the sense that they're negative, not that the sense that they're any more sophisticated or anything. I think that's bogus, but I mean, people who go negative, like, routinely like to compliment themselves on their sophistication, Like, I saw references to, like, the fans aren't being critical, right? I mean, that sort of meme has been out there in a lot of these recent reviews. Like, and somebody who's got some negative things to say, or mostly negative things to say, is like, smarter, more discerning. That was the guy at film.com, right?
Also, question for you, Jason.
Yeah.
It hasn't. So I think when they're playing smaller markets, they're getting like the best music critics to go out and review them because they typically have one music critic or a couple at the most. But a lot of these big conglomerates either contract out their reviewing, or they have this like team of reviewers or team of bloggers. And from a lot of the coverage I've seen, it seems like it's not the big, more reputable music critics that go out that have a lot more on the line to lose. So like you have these reviews like, from the Washington Post that they're blogging about this crap that no one necessarily is going to see. And I found it offensive. Some of the stuff that they were trying to publish, what they called James Fakeha and Farsi.
Oh my gosh,
Okay.
it was totally over the
It's
top,
amateurish.
inflammatory. Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a great point, Jill. And I'm going to put like an age spin on it, right? I think in those smaller markets, you had grown-ups, like somebody who's like 45, and their career is music critic for the Charlotte Observer or something,
Yeah.
right? And that's your reviewer. And you get to the big city, and your reviewer is 29-year-old snark blogger for the Washington Post post-rock blog, you know, and
Right.
his mindset is be the biggest asshole I can as flamboyantly as I can.
So someone notices me.
Yeah, so someone notices and I get a bunch of hits, right?
Yeah.
The Charlotte Observer is going to sell the same number of papers every day, whether or not, you know, this like really showy negative review is in there or not, you know.
Right.
But the Washington Post post-rock blog is not going to get hits unless, you know, J. Freedom Duloc and David Mallet and get some buzz in the blogosphere, which I refuse to give them because their review is just asinine. I mean, and how they could speak about that in that way about Jeff and Ginger is just unbelievable to me. Like, these guys they've got to be my age, you know. I mean, they cannot be much older than me at all. You know, there's no way those guys are in their mid-30s. I mean, they've got to be.
I would even say that they're younger than you because these guys have this like sort of
They probably
second.
are.
You know, they're wanting to. Their stop. The Washington Post is not like what they want in life. They want it to be Rolling Stone, you know, correspondence or whatever, or do feature musician sort of gigs. But these, you know, it's just amateurish, and it's even more amateurish that you know, and I hate to say this. I know I alluded to this in the conversation that you posted at the blog, but I hate to say it that, you know, a lot of these bloggers for these big newspapers who are kind of these, you know, maybe not giving 100% truthful accounts of things or 100% sincere accounts of things, they're trolling us for news as opposed to, hey, look at what the New York Times said. You know, it's a lot easier to...
Well, the New York Times isn't going to give you anything inflammatory, you know. You got to
Right,
find that.
because they're
You got to find that on the
professional.
internet.
They're professional. And these guys are not professional that have been writing some of these reviews.
And you know, I would take this sort of age thing, and I would make it even bigger. I mean, than this tour, and in attitudes toward the Pumpkins generally. And I think we've had some posts that have gotten close to saying this sort of thing, but actually, I think particularly that My Bloody Valentine review that we linked, talking about how latching on to My Bloody Valentine is like a signal that you're a serious musician and a grown-up now and you aren't into corporate rock radio anymore, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I really think generally that a lot of the antipathy toward the Pumpkins is insecurity about growing up. You know, it's people who feel they need to reject the things of their childhood, you know, to like
Right.
to ingratiate themselves with their 40-something boss. You know, they don't want to come off like they're just not willing to stand there and argue with that guy and say, no, Smashing Pumpkins are really good. They're just as good as The Who. They're just as good as the Rolling Stones. You know, like the kids don't have the guts to make that argument, right? So they're like, yeah, Smashing Pumpkins, they're like some pop group on the radio. I mean, Rat in a Cage, they suck. You know, and I think there's a lot of that.
To be fair,
and-
though, like to these people who probably don't deserve the fairness, like Billy kind of makes their angle pretty easy. Like
Oh, he does.
by doing these things where he he
Absolutely.
talks to the fans directly and pulls them on stage or whatever. Like if they were going or planning on writing an even-handed review or at least making an attempt to kind of put a positive spin on something, it's like any snarky bone in their body now just gets jazzed up when he does something like that, because now it's like, oh well, no need to actually write about what happened at the show, or no need to actually write about the music. Now I have an event to write about. Like,
Oh yeah,
clearly
Billy blew it. I mean, in Washington, Billy he just flat out. I thought this is like the worst I think I've ever seen him. He just kind of lost his brain for a second. I mean, which I think is understandable when you get fired up. But I mean, that doesn't make it good. I mean, he basically, this kid was giving him the finger, and he's like, what's the problem? And the guy said something like, you don't rock anymore, and where's James Eha? Something like that. And Billy's response is to go, oh, James Eha's right there! Look, it's James! Jimmy, look, it's James! Into the audience, and it was some girl, right? And he's like, come on up, James! And he drags this girl up on stage. And, to me, the whole thing, he puts his arm around this girl, and he's like, James, what have you been up to since you were in the band? And, the unstated, subtext of the whole response to this guy, to me, seemed to be like Billy saying, hey, you know what, dude? All these girls here still want to do me, so shut up. I mean, that kind of seemed like the quality of the response, and that is not a very high quality response.
Yeah.
And like you said, it just creates, it totally did overshadow the show. And I think Billy knew it, because he comes back the next night, and what does he say to the audience? Nothing. He said literally nothing. It was like zero banter the entire show. I mean, and when I say zero, I mean zero. Between songs, he did not say a word. It was all music the next night, And I think that's as much as you're going to get an acknowledgement from Billy that I fucked up, is that sort of turning your back on what you had been doing all night the previous night.
Well, and I think he was trying. It was not a very good way to do it, but I think he was trying to make the point that, I mean, he said in interviews lately that he's willing to listen to criticism, but most of the criticism that he's been getting isn't well thought out.
That's right.
It's not an actual suggestion. It's people screaming out, "You don't rock anymore. Where's James and Darcy?" And that's what a lot of these negative reviews are also. Where's James and Darcy? It's the same stupid, pointless argument.
It's interesting because I feel like, we're not here to argue whether or not Billy Corgan is self-indulgent. We know he's self-indulgent. We're also not here to argue whether or not he acts like an ass sometimes, because he does. But what the problem is A, there's no outlet for him to, there hasn't been really an outlet for him to express this, although I understand that the documentary has a lot to say about this type of issue. But
you should really check that out.
I know. But, in these situations, he's dealing with it kind of immaturely, but it's hard for me to blame him because, how many times can you really put up with the kid on the playground that doesn't want to play with you but wants to mock you or ridicule you? Yeah. At some point you lash out, and I can't really blame him for that, because the people that are negative, that are not interested, there are these people that go to the concerts expecting to hear exactly what they want to hear, and they're totally unequivocally, intolerant of hearing anything they know.
Exactly.
And this is exactly what Jason and I experienced when we were in Atlantic City. It's like they went apeshit for things that they heard that they knew, and when they didn't hear what they knew, they, screamed about things. At some point, I, wrote on my phone, I, mock texted to Jason. I was like, what is this? Is this Pavlov? Are we ringing a bell?
That's right.
So,
you hear the start of Bullet with Butterfly Wings, and you run around uncontrollably for 4 minutes, and then you stop when you stop hearing noise. I mean, that's the brain level we're dealing with.
Right, I mean, and to some extent, I feel like it's indicative of sort of the instant gratification society we live in, not to get too esoteric about this, but people can create playlists of nothing but things they want to hear. And when you go to a show 20, 30 years ago, you expected to hear some level of experimentation. Now, because people don't have that ability to be supported over a long career of music, they want to hear only what they want to hear. And Billy has as much talked about this, and, I agree with him to a large extent. I think you have to appease those people to some extent because they still are supporting you. They obviously have liked something you've done. But it becomes ludicrous and it becomes anti-art at some point.
Well, the argument people make at this point is that if Billy didn't want these people to come to his shows, he shouldn't have reformed the band with the name The Smashing Pumpkins. That's their argument. And then, there's a million ways to counter that argument. But I just wanted to bring that up there because, people will say, Billy asked for it. If he didn't want to play the hits, he should have just carried on as Zwan or carried on as Billy Corgan, or called himself Corgan and Chamberlain or something. And I think there's plenty of
Cajun
good,
plant.
yeah, exactly. I think there's plenty of good responses to that. One of which is, and I think this is the one that Billy feels most deeply, is that he feels the Smashing Pumpkins are his deserved identity in the public sphere, and he deserves that name. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And also that this attitude that they have now about playing their recent material, playing material that happens to get them off right now, and hoping the crowd is along for the ride. And if they're not, that's unfortunate. But hopefully they are. If the band genuinely is playing music that they're excited about, they hope that excitement will translate. Right? That is the attitude the Smashing Pumpkins have always had.
Right.
Anyone who knows this band knows that's true. They have always played a preponderance of music from their new album before those songs were hits, all the way back to, well, obviously Gish. They had no hits. But, the Siamese Dream tour, people wanted to hear Gish, and they were playing Siamese Dream songs,
Right.
Then those songs became hits. Then they went on Melancholy. They played Melancholy songs, They played a few of the Siamese Dream songs, but not as many as you might have thought,
Well, and
it wasn't like, it sure wasn't like the Melancholy sets were 3/4 Gish and Siamese Dream, because that's what people knew, and then a few Melancholy songs. That was not what it was like. And then they went out on Adore, right? And they played almost entirely Adore songs. All I'm saying is they've always been like this. And so Billy is thinking that's what the Smashing Pumpkins is. The Smashing Pumpkins is the same band that the Smashing Pumpkins always were. Not the Smashing Pumpkins means I have to play what the Smashing Pumpkins are to radio listeners, right? Because that's a false image of what the Smashing Pumpkins are, right? I think he's been pretty clear about saying that.
Right, and honestly, I think this hit me after the Borgata show and listening to recordings of the New York shows. Honestly speaking, I agree with you 100%, Jason, on that sort of line of reasoning. I would even go one step further, that this current iteration of the band itself is most aligned with the spirit that I fell in love with for early Smashing Pumpkins. And this might blow your mind, Chris, because I know you're with me on the love of the early Smashing Pumpkins. But I basically, I fell in love with that sort of experimental, essence that the Pumpkins exhibited really early on. They didn't have a lot of means to experiment. They were kind of... but those early 89, 90, 91 shows that they played. And that's what led me to basically try and seek out all of the tapers of those 1991 shows to figure out, do you have listenable tapes? And listening to songs like I Am One Part Two completely redeveloped and reorchestrated, redesigned for how they are playing right now. Sort of and I would actually attribute a lot of the influence to Uli John Roth right now and Pink Floyd. I think that they're really playing towards that style. But the style of music they're playing right now has a really solid spirit of experimentation and sort of self-searching, I think. I think Billy's playing it, I think Billy is playing these songs for as well as to challenge himself. That seems really evident to me in these shows. And that sort of spirit is what drew me to the Pumpkins' early stuff in the very first place, because I'm more interested in that type of music than I am in sort of the contrived Machina era kind of music. I know, Jason, you're a big fan of the Machina stuff, but in terms of my own personal taste, I really like that sort of experimental, Adore era stuff, the early Gish, pre-Gish era. They're still trying to find a voice, and I think they're trying to do that right now because they have so many different styles that they can play and so much good musicianship. And so these shows have really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that I think they're re-entering into that sort of genuine love of music, as opposed to that contrived image thing that they had to deal with after Jimmy left the band. I know that's really, really vague and really sort of confusing, but it feels right to me, and it feels right watching them. So if you don't like it, fine. I think Billy's as much said, go away. Go away, right?
Well, here's my take on, like you said, I'm a big fan of the early days, and on one hand, I kind of do agree that, what they did in the early days, which was, I mean, we have a pretty sparse record of at least 88 and 1989 and 1990, but at almost every show, they're rotating in new songs, because
Right.
they had no hits, they had no demo tapes even at that point for sale at their shows up until, I guess, mid-1989. And they're always rotating in new stuff, and by the time they were selling those demo tapes, I don't even think they were playing half of those songs live anymore. But my issue with I Am One Part 2 is that it's been redone and rearranged, like you said, but it's not I Am One Part 2. There are some lyrics for I Am One Part 2 in there, but I defy you to point to any other part of that song and compare it to any part of the original I Am One Part 2. And I'm not going to sit here and say that, oh, they should play I Am One Part 2 straight, how it was from that real-time tape that we have. I'm not going to pretend that I Am One Part 2 is a great classic that should never be changed or altered. But I think that you can like it or not like it, and I personally don't. I'm personally not a fan of kind of the jammy, kind of guitar delay songs without singing in them. But I think that's independent of it being I Am One Part 2. Yes, I'm not a pot smoker. I will have to admit that right now.
Or LSD, as Pink Floyd was.
Right. It is not cold in here, as they say.
but wouldn't you? I mean, do you understand my point in terms of like they're experimental the way they want to be experimental? They're gonna be experimental, and if you don't like it, fine. But they're doing it for the sake of their own musicianship. And I think for me, that's what's gratifying, because I can go see an Arcade Fire show and see them play the album. I can go see, all of the hits. I can go to a Weezer show and see all of, them play the album straight through exactly as they recorded it. But it raises, the Pumpkins have always raised this question of what is a song, and what is it, what is music? This is getting a little bit too like loosey-goosey for me. But
well, the Pumpkins provide all sorts of extra levels and material
Right.
for crazy fans like us to get interested in. There's like Weezer. It's like the package is what you have in the album, and there isn't like a
Right.
whole lot beyond that. Okay, Weezer's probably a bad example because they do have a lot of cult fans, but maybe the Foo Fighters, they're a good example. What you have on the album pretty much is the band.
Right.
The songs and the band don't really exist on any different level than that. Whereas the Pumpkins, you get the album, you start getting the concert tapes, you go to concerts, and it's always new and different, and there's like, you're getting more things,
We were joking about Bullet with Butterfly Wings earlier, and how many times has that song gone through reiteration? It's been reinvented a million times.
Darn.
But it's that same, yeah, maybe you don't like I Am One Part 2 right now, but it's basically, Billy's saying it's less relevant to me whether or not my fans like it, because this is what we're doing. Isn't he?
And I think that's fine. Like, it's not like I'm gonna, stop listening to them or anything just because there's like one or two songs at the shows I don't like. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I think it is reasonable that, like, there does seem to be a fairly significant group of people at the shows who don't enjoy some of this crazy stuff that he's doing. I think that just comes with the territory. When you're doing stuff that's crazy and experimental, you're going to lose a lot of people, and that's why it seems kind of like, it seems kind of strange that he like lashes out at fans for not, I mean, it's one thing to suffer in silence and another thing to scream, "You don't rock anymore, where's Darcy?" But it just seems like if you're going to go on a limb and do stuff that's experimental and different, I mean, they know that fans are going to have this reaction, so they have to have some patience, and I think that they kind of do, because, like you said, they have been having a good time on this tour, despite what you think just from reading reviews. But
and I think last night's... Sorry, I just to rebut that, I think last night shows evidence that they do react to it, because they did play a lot of singles, and the crowd reacted wonderfully.
Yeah.
So Sorry, Jason.
Chris, do you remember? No, it's fine. After Columbus, we were talking, and we were speculating as to whether the general attitude. You were the one saying this, that the general attitude demonstrated by the Columbus show, where they didn't really play an acoustic set, and even the electric set didn't have much of anything that would make the crowd happy. And you were basically speculating that, was this entire tour now going to be kind of like a draw you in with the 20th anniversary claim and then kind of piss you off so that you'll never come back,
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, no, I don't really think it's going to be that way. I think the reviews will be good. I think what's transpired has borne out your version.
And Billy's pretty much admitted as much in the, I think it was the WRXP, I keep getting it mixed up with XRP, WRXP interview. He pretty much said, the fans that aren't positive about what we're doing and don't, rather than bitch and moan about it, just leave.
Yeah.
It almost does seem like he's trying to go as experimental as he can, just to kind of, I don't want to say weed out the fans, but just kind of thin the herd a little bit.
Weed out is probably right. I mean, not to say that the people who would leave are weeds. I mean, that's not, in that sense, it's not a good analogy. But I think he wants this tour to make a statement. It does increasingly seem that this tour, in some ways, he's intending. If he has a plan, if he has thought this out, and I kind of imagine he has, just because of his track record, that he does kind of want to make the statement like, look, Smashing Pumpkins aren't going to be the hit parade. And if you're going to come to our concert wanting the hit parade, and you're going to be complaining and whining that you don't get the hit parade, just don't come, right? And how do you get that message out there? I mean, it's kind of hard to get that message out there, Well,
Right.
This would be one way, tour and create a bunch of drama where you're basically telling everyone, don't expect the hit parade, right? I mean, that's one way to get your message out.
Well, it just seems funny that he calls this a 20th anniversary tour, and before the tour even starts, he posts a blog on SmashingPumpkins.com saying, for all intents and purposes, this is not a 20th anniversary tour. Of course, the only people that read that are people like us who already kind of know what's going on. The vast majority of the fans that are at the shows won't have read that, and will be going in expecting the 20th anniversary hit parade.
One of the things that you were going to discuss, Chris, is about wanting to know from those of us who have been there in person more recently, is it just a couple people yelling, creating the drama, or is it larger than that,
Yeah.
It's definitely larger than that. Is it a majority of the crowd? I would say no.
Right.
I don't think a majority of the crowd is hostile. I think a large number of the crowd is kind of like us, patient, willing to see what the band is going to do, And then there's another large amount of the crowd that's like into whatever, They just like
Right.
worship Billy Corgan and they'll dance and pretend they love
And drink some
whatever sound
beer.
he makes, And but there's definitely a sizable group, I would say minority only in the sense that they don't comprise 50% of the crowd, But there's a sizable unhappy group, And it's not just one or two people. So I hope no one takes anything we've said to mean that we think it's just one or two people, because it's definitely not just one or two people. I mean, it's a huge number of people that are unhappy and unpleased by these shows. It's a very real phenomenon. I don't really understand why all this, people talking about, was that staged? Like the first time the thing happened in New York. It's just like pro wrestling. Like, I didn't understand that at all. Like, Billy's head of security is standing right there the whole time. If anything was a hint that it was not staged, I would think that would be it. I don't think the head of security needs to hover over the tour manager. When they did do a little play later in Boss Doug Goodman being Manny Ramirez, I doubt that Gio hovered over Doug Goodman wondering if he was going to do something crazy.
Well, but at the same time, for me, it's spoken more to the sense of entitlement that a lot of these fans feel, which is really strange. Like, I guess I never, growing up in the Midwest, I really never experienced the East Coast mentality where, you watch the news and it never rains. It always, like, downpours or torrentially downpours. But random, yes, but whenever you go to these shows, people have this really weird reaction to them, at least on the East Coast where I've been, where, they either love it or they hate it. And it's weird. I don't know. And I think that the band bears the brunt of that because they're trying to do these experimental things, and the fans, even though, yes, you can't necessarily categorize everyone as enjoying it or everyone as hating it, as Matthew Perpetua did.
Oh, I don't know. He was kind of mixed. I don't know. I feel the Pumpkins are polarizing, Jill.
Isn't that kind of what they're going for as artists? Like, don't you want to make everyone either love you or hate you?
Yeah, I mean, Billy inspires passionate response. He does. But most artists don't. I think even on the East Coast they don't.
Well, maybe, but also I think just as much as Billy Corgan wants to inspire a polarizing response, the people that are covering him and misrepresenting the crowds to which he's playing are also polarizing. They're categorizing things or misrepresenting how things actually were. I'm just not. I'm sorry I had to cut you off. I just don't really. I asked you before, I think, when we were just talking privately, like, who misrepresented this tour and when? I haven't seen it, to be honest. I think people were giving genuine negative reviews that they just didn't... I mean, there were some mistakes and overstatements, but I didn't feel... I mean, like, there was a negative vibe. I mean, when I went to that Washington show, and that whole thing happened in the encore, with that guy giving him a finger, everyone walked out, like, silent. Like, not necessarily in a negative, but like just like we said during the show, it overshadowed everything. It was the story, and it took away from the show. I don't feel like it was that way in New York because it was more like what did he say? Did I pay for this shit? Like he was being funny, but then in the same breath he was saying, it's a rock show. This is a joke. Come on, But Fluxblog went on the record saying he was, of course, mocking us, but that was very much a consensus opinion of the few thousand bitter, heartbroken fans who exited the United Palace as if on a death march.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's
ridiculous.
No, that is, yeah.
Before you give those journalists too much credit, that's what he said, and that's not at all what was true.
But he's also an amateur blogger. I mean, he's like on our level, Jill. I mean,
you think? He has a bigger readership than we do, I think.
Sure. But before you were saying, why does Rolling Stone or whatever cite some dippy blog instead of the New York Times? And he's like just a slightly less dippy blog. I mean, he definitely has a bigger readership. But the reason, I mean, and he's very good, but he's not. I mean, he's like my age, and he's just some guy with opinions. And I mean, clearly, I mean, it's very palpable to me when you read. His work, like, leading up to it. I mean, he's a big fan, and he came into that show with a world of expectations. He went so far as to write out his ideal set list, which, I'm sorry, I've been reading, a million things about this band forever. And, like, anyone who starts writing out an ideal set list ends up hating the show they go to. They end up hating it.
You're just setting yourself up at that point.
And that was an absolute fan thing to do. That wasn't a journalist thing to do. That's a fan thing to do, right? I have these huge expectations, and they're not met, and I'm disappointed. But then everyone, like, I think people treated him like he was writing for the New York Times, basically. When they went out and started repeating what he said, and I don't think they quite understood how much of a fan he is. Like how much he loves this band, and he also, and he was very open about this, though. I think people just didn't pay much attention. I mean, it's his blog. He's like investing it thoroughly with his personal opinion. It wasn't really meant to be like this objective journalist review of the show. And part of his opinion, and he was very open about the fact that, like, he had these expectations, and that largely the expectations were there because he missed the band back then. He never saw them in the 90s. He was finally going to see the Smashing Pumpkins. I mean, literally this level of giddiness, and like, maybe they'll play Through the Eyes of Ruby just like us, And like, well, not just like us, but maybe like we would have been before we got a little more jaded about the band.
He had clearly put all of his fictional 100 in Through the Eyes of Ruby.
He did not want to lose that $100, And I think the guy has a lot of astute things to say about the art of the band, but I mean, just in this one instance of the concert experience, He had way too high expectations. They were never going to be met. And then, like you said, Jill, I mean, that's just a factual error to like impute your personal opinion of the show to the thousands of people who were there with you. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to do. Everyone else,
it is, and everyone does it.
Me, but it's BS. I mean, it's just it's bunk. I mean, he showed for everyone who's listening and didn't maybe read this, this guy linked to Jill's live blog and referred to her as having attended the Bizarro World version of the concert. That's the level of confidence he had in his own little statement. Whereas a link on his own blog to the video of Billy performing "Everything Is Beautiful," which is where Billy did the rant that the guy said Billy was making fun of us, etc., etc. And in the video frame, you can see many people cheering, laughing, clapping in response to Billy's comment. So it's like, hello, Matthew. Maybe you should notice that people are cheering. Clearly, they didn't feel the same way about the show that you did. Clearly, your opinion on what happened is not a fact, is not an objective opinion shared by thousands of people. In fact, there was sizable dissent as to how people felt about what Billy said and how people felt about the show. But
not to mention the fact that you're linking to a review of the show that was highly glowing.
Oh, but that was the Bizarro World version, Jill.
Sorry, jeez. Because I would live blog in Meta,
which you attended with John Corellis of the New York Times, who was also at the Bizarro World version. That was the comment I made on his post. Clearly. But I mean, without lecturing, I mean, this is all. This whole seemingly going negative on this guy is really just to say it's a guy who's a passionate music fan with a blog. And yet his version of that show that largely got repeated all over the place as if he was a credible, neutral journalist, when really he's a fanboy, Well,
and what's so frustrating about it is that I think the band does have a reaction to this, and it's not because there's so many media news to get influenced by right now, there's not a very solid and reliable way to get feedback as an artist.
How can they not take it seriously? How can Billy not be worried that, like, his band is, like, millions of people out there who haven't been into these shows are reading stuff like little blurbs and hearing them on AM shock jock radio, AM in the morning, but it's on the FM, right? They're hearing shock jock radio on their way to work, and the guy's like, Smashing Pumpkins shows suck. Billy Corgan infuriates fans. And next up will be the latest from Blink-182. I mean, how can you not be really concerned and upset about that? I mean, that's your brand name out there, and it's getting dragged through the mud. How can you not want to respond? And I see a lot of people like getting, saying he shouldn't be responding. I mean, to me that's crazy. He shouldn't even be aware of this. Like he should just go on playing his music and not like care. I just think that's crazy.
Well, Andrew, you didn't get to attend any of the shows on the 20th anniversary tour, but you can tell us what happened this week in Pumpkin's history.
Yeah, I kind of should have taken this week off too. I'm sorry, but anyhow, well, tonight I'm going to talk about a show I did attend. 7 years ago this week, the post Pumpkins era was kicking off in Southern California. Jimmy, and Matt and David Pajo all were debuting as Zwan at a couple of small venues in Southern California. The very first public Zwan show was in Pomona, and then they played 2 days later in Orange County, and then they went down to San Diego, and then they finished up in the Roxy in Los Angeles. And as you want to talk about shows that were fun and exciting and pretty well received by the audience, those shows I think fit the bill. I think it was it was huge because obviously the Swan didn't drop any demos to the internet before they before they started, so it was all new, and so it was very exciting in that way. But I think probably maybe what the biggest or the longest lasting result of the shows was the fact that little Kelly Osbourne went to one of the shows and spoke about it afterwards on their little reality show. And 2002 that reality show became the biggest thing in the United States, and everyone suddenly knew. Everyone knew that Kelly Osbourne hated Billy's new band, and that it sucked. Can't remember her exact words, but even I think Sharon tried to soften it up, but a little bit, even with the history that they had. But so that was sort of the initial public, what the world saw of Zwan was out of Kelly Osbourne's mouth, and that happened about 7 years ago this week.
I imagine it would have been a hard time live blogging that show, since no one would have known the names of any of those songs.
Yeah, speaking
Right.
of which, so I will never be... So, two things. Speaking of which, I will never be remembering Zwan for the stupid comments that Kelly Osbourne made, because I was very excited about a song called Chrysanthemum. So, did we ever find the set list for that very first show that Zwan did? Did they play... Would that have been a fifth performance of Chrysanthemum?
I don't think. Yeah, I mean, maybe. No one really knows. I'm not even entirely convinced that show happened.
Yeah, it's sort of a mystery. It certainly wasn't, publicly announced.
That was during the internet, though.
It was like, I mean, it was something like they were playing as a backing band for someone else. It wasn't even clear they were playing Zwan music. No one knows.
It's
Yeah,
like
I
the
sure
early
looked
days of the Smashing Pumpkins. It's a total mystery.
You'll have to go ask Sweeney. Maybe he'll tell you.
Yes. Send a message to Mr. Sweeney.
Get an interview with him.
Dear Mr. Sweeney, what happened on 11/14/2001? Where were you the afternoon thereof?
At the Track 16 Gallery.
Santa Monica.
Ah, Swan. I miss Swan.
I miss Swan. Come back, Swan. No, not
Come
really.
back.
The
Not
critics don't miss Swan.
really. Don't come back. They should.
Well, we've gone on long enough today. Thanks for joining us this evening, and I believe we will have a podcast on schedule again next week, and I believe we will be talking about the If All Goes Wrong DVD, since we were planning about talking about that tonight, but we ended up having a lot to say about the 20th anniversary tour, and the week after next is Thanksgiving, so there will not be a show. But as usual, you can leave us feedback on hipstersunited.com, and I was planning on treating everyone with our closing song of the week to Chrysanthemum from the first Zwan performance that we have recorded from November 16th, 2001. But Jason has convinced me instead, in honor of the 20th anniversary tour, to go with Everything is Beautiful from...
I think it's only appropriate.
Yeah, what's your favorite performance of that,
But it
Jason?
could have been Chrysanthemum, Jason.
I know. I mean, I think everyone would want to hear Chrysanthemum.
Hate mail to JJB at
But I think instead-
hipstersunited.com.
We should play Everything is Beautiful.
Screw you guys that want
I think
hits.
I think
Screw
the
you guys that
performance
want hits.
I think the performance from tonight would be good, Chris. Let's cue that up now.
All right.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. It's been quite a podcast, perhaps the greatest podcast we have ever delivered. And there was that meandering part about the Uncasville concert, but I just like to say that every one of you is beautiful. Everyone is beautiful in their own way.
Boom, 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 boom.
I'm sure in that middle part of the show you were tired of hearing us talk about journalists and bloggers. You know what? I got one word for you. Radiohead. Ooh, but you didn't hear that one coming. Everything is beautiful in its own way. Hey, wait! Do I see some of you clicking stop on your embedded MP3 players? Goodbye! Goodbye! Hope you had a great podcast. Yeah, maybe we'll see you next week when we really will play Chrysanthemum just because that's what you want to hear. And maybe Pins will be here with his jury-rigged microphone. I'm sure everyone wanted to see Pins. I'm sorry, he's just not part of the podcast. He's on the blog, but he's not part of the podcast. You'll just have to deal with it, okay? But it's okay. You know why it's okay? Because everyone is beautiful. Everyone is beautiful.
Everyone is beautiful,
Everyone's
including Matthew Griffith Hatua.
in their
Rolling
own
Stone.
way.
Your beautiful Rolling Stone.
Wah, 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 wah. Andrew, solo.
Chirp, chirp, chirp. Oh, that's the other song.
Chris, solo. Chris. Wah, 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 wah. Jill, solo. Jill. Ladies and gentlemen, I've saved the last solo for myself. Okay.
So embarrassed.
And
by
now the
this.
song for this week is Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. Chris, I know you'll be queuing that up in a few moments.
Oh yeah. I'm
Right.
exercising my veto power on that one.
Right. Fuck off, everybody. Good night.
Is that really the end of our podcast?
The Hipsters United podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Smashing Pumpkins, Virgin Records, or Warner Brothers Reprise Records. All opinions offered by panelists or guests of the Hipsters United podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Smashing Pumpkins. All audio during the show is licensed for non-profit use per the terms and conditions on the Live Music Archive at archive.org. Intro music is from the Machina 2 album released for free download on the internet by the Smashing Pumpkins in September of 2000.